it was really the network that we built through Atlas Network that made us recruit folks in Europe and these think tank staffers to join the program. Starting from scratch at ground zero, it would have been difficult to identify these folks, but because of Atlas Network, we were able to successfully execute this program.
This is Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio.
Welcome to the Atlas Network podcast. I'm Michael Carnuccio. At Atlas Network, we work every day to strengthen the worldwide freedom movement, supporting more than 500 independent partner organizations, advancing individual liberty, free enterprise, and limited government across more than 100 different countries. And we're proud to bring you the stories of courageous leaders building a freer, more prosperous world. Well, today's conversation is about something absolutely essential to the future of the freedom movement. That's talent. Because ideas don't advance themselves, policies won't defend themselves, and freedom doesn't sustain itself. It takes people. Our guest today is Casey Given, Executive Director of Young Voices, an organization that is quietly but powerfully shaping the next generation of communicators, policy entrepreneurs, and public intellectuals for the liberty movement. If you've read an op-ed by a rising free market voice in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Newsweek, or maybe you've seen a compelling freedom-oriented perspective on cable news or a major podcast, well, there's a good chance Young Voices helped make that happen. So today we're diving into really three big questions. Is the freedom movement facing a talent pipeline crisis or opportunity? How do we train young advocates not just to be right, but to be persuasive? And what does it take to build a freedom movement that lasts for generations? Well, I'm excited to be joined by Casey Given to answer those questions and so much more. Casey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Casey, let me start off by just asking just the broad question. If we look forward 15 years, right, and we see the freedom movement, it's either thriving or it's stalled out. And talent seems like it's the big indicator of what's going to happen. So am I right in that? And what do you see when you project forward 15 years in the freedom movement?
Yes, absolutely. I think that talent is the key element of any successful movement. And, I would say that I think there's good news, bad news when it comes to the state of the talent pipeline in the liberty movement. I do think that in recent decades, there has been slightly less of a focus on talent development. However, that's the bad news. The good news is that there's a number of organizations, including mine, but not exclusively Young Voices, that have significantly shifted their attention to talent development as a strategic priority for growth. And I am very excited for the future. And I think that the liberty movement is really getting its eye on the ball on the importance of developing the next generation of messengers, think tanks, policy analysts, et cetera. So I think that we are looking at good decades to come.
So, some critics would say that, man, progressives have already won the media and the cultural narrative, the high ground there, that there's a lot of great ideas in the freedom movement, but not able to communicate them. You would disagree with that. And so how would you respond to those critics?
Yes, I want to, well, first, I think there's kind of a tendency in human psychology that we always think the grass is greener on the other side. And actually, the first time Young Voices was quoted in Politico, we were mentioned, I think it was around 2016. It was in a piece that complimented how well the center-right was at talent development compared to the center-left. So in many ways, our ideological enemies might say that it's the exact reverse, that talent development on the right is stronger than the left. One of the key thesis in that article is that the center right is so much better at paying interns and fellowships, et cetera, that there's really kind of a monetary structure to get people to be invested in the movement as young professionals. So and over the years, there's been a lot of great programs like the Coke Associate program, the Summer Fellowship program, fellowships at places like IHS, of course, a million internships, and professional development programs like Young Voices, America's Future. So there's a lot of great opportunities, at least for entry into the movement. I think what the next step of development where we could improve is really kind of connecting the dots of shepherding talented young professionals into fulfilling careers as lifelong advocates for the ideas of liberty, as my staff likes to call it. I want to say that first, I don't think we're in a hopeless situation, that actually there's a lot of great entry points and ways to get young people excited about the ideas. It's the career development part that really needs room for improvement. And that's at Young Voices, what we're trying to focus on.
Well, Casey, we've been spending quite a bit of time already talking about the impact and kind of the vision with Young Voices, but I'm sure folks are wondering, what does Young Voices do on a day-to-day basis? Like, what is the actual work that Young Voices is doing?
Yes. So Young Voices is a nonprofit a talent agency and PR firm. What that means is we work on identifying, amplifying, and empowering classical liberal students and young professionals who are looking for careers in public policy. Specifically on a daily basis, we edit and pitch their op-eds. We schedule them for broadcast interviews. We throw events and fellowships for public policy learning. And we also have a speakers bureau for immigrants who came to the US to tell their stories of coming to America, called the Dissident Project. So we're doing all sorts of media outputs between those op-eds, radio, TV, public speaking, to help empower rising thought leaders for liberty to build a brand for themselves and ultimately develop a career in the world of ideas.
I'm impressed and love to hear that. Look, full disclosure, my undergraduate degree was broadcast journalism. I started the beginning of my career in TV and radio broadcast, and then a little bit in public relations before I got involved in the worldwide freedom movement. And this is something that I've always thought about, right? Is in journalism schools and in all across the U.S., we have so much talent that gets it, but they're kind of steered in other directions. So now here you all come, and you're able to provide that resource, help grow, create the pipeline. How do you identify talent? How do you recognize? Is it more just you're getting so much demand inbound that you're filtering through, or do you all go out and say, hey, there's a gift here. There's someone with interest. We need to help expand this person's career and perspective?
Yes. So historically, it has been the former, where there's been a lot of inbound demand. So Young Voices, we get about 200 applications a year for about 60 to 80 slots that we accept in our Cornerstone Contributor program. That said, we are kind of trying to shift our model where we're more intentional about reaching out to talented young people, communicators that we see online who are spreading the message of liberty. So that's kind of part of a strategic planning process that we're undergoing, is to be more proactive in recruitment. And what we look for is students and young professionals out of college. I would say that the latter group is really our specialty, is finding folks who are in their early careers, because oftentimes that's where there's not a lot of professional development opportunities for folks right as after they enter the workforce, and who have a propensity to be communicating online, whether that's through op-eds, social media posts, etc., who are really hungry and looking to develop themselves, and of course are ideologically on message. I think that's super important for classical liberals, is we want to find people who really have not just that ideological purity, but also that propensity to post, which is actually quite a rare combination we're finding. it can be harder to recruit people with both of those talents at once. But that's what Young Voices mission is that we're trying to find these next generations of great thought leaders for liberty to carry the message forward and amplify it in the media.
You mentioned ideology, and I've been wondering about this because we often feel this tension between consistency in ideology and then strategic persuasion in the media marketplace, if you will. And so, what do you see with that tension, and how do you all step into that and address that?
Yes, this is something that I've thought about quite deeply over the years, because especially in the media ecosystem, there has been a great growth of specifically conservative media over the years. You know, outlets like the Daily Wire, for example, the Blaze, that have really boomed in the past decade, I would say. And it can be tempting, especially for classical liberal, libertarian voices, to kind of blend more into the right wing media ecosystem. And my thought on that is that I think it's first of all, the development of an alternative media that is more sympathetic to pro liberty ideas is great. However, it's important, at Young Voices, we want to guard against our writers just trying to become another Ben Shapiro or the like, in the sense that we want to develop classical liberal voices that are penetrating the mainstream, not conservative voices entirely. I think that that's important, and especially when the news cycle, for example, I think this week with the bombings of Iran is really important to our model to showcase people who are truly classical liberals who show skepticism towards government power and executive overreach versus just somebody blending into the right, cheering on President Trump or whatnot. I think it's important to develop this class of independent-minded thought leaders for liberty who are not partisan.
You know, as you're explaining kind of the work that you do, the approach, I'm thinking about a coach of an athlete that is just uber talented, knows they've got a gift, they're passionate about the sport or activity they do, but the coach sometimes has to come in and help them mold that and shape that to have more success. So do you find that sometimes you have to really coach folks on how to hone in or nuance how they present their ideas?
Absolutely. That is deeply ingrained in our model. I have a staff of, I believe, 5 or 6 folks, program staffers, who are exclusively focused on media coaching and placement services. So when it comes to broadcast, for example, exactly, every TV and radio hit that we do, we have a pitcher who does not just secure the opportunity, but also does a practice round if needed with our writers to make sure that they are ready to go. They're radio ready to communicate these ideas. And then even afterwards, if something goes wrong or if there's any notes that we have, we make sure that we communicate that to the writer as well. So this is something, really, this learning by doing approach is what Young Voices has embraced. I think that that's something quite unique about us, is that we're not just teaching folks on the computer or in the lecture classroom about how to do public relations type work. They're actually and doing it on a daily basis. And Young Voices itself, we get over 200 media hits a month between op-eds, radio, TV.
That's amazing. 200 hits a month. You know, I was sitting here thinking that one of the criticisms or the challenges that you probably face is folks think that, you know, media is just closed off to free market voices. But 200 hits a month says otherwise. So you find it to be a different marketplace.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, especially for classical liberals, there's 2 opportunities that I think are really conducive to media hits. Number one is what I mentioned earlier, is this growth of kind of the center right wing media is there's a lot of opportunities to publish ideas that conservatives like, but also on the left in the more mainstream outlets like the New York Timeses of the world, the CNNs, is that what they like about libertarians, classical liberals, is that we're more independently minded and that we come up with takes that are not necessarily just condoning government power like the Trump administration's whatever the Trump administration's actions are. So I think that it's good to embrace our independent mindedness to not just get hits into this kind of growing right-wing media atmosphere, but also to get major media hits in the mainstream.
Man, I love that, Casey. When I first became the CEO of the free market think tank in Oklahoma, it was about the same time a guy named Arthur Brooks took over the AEI, and he started a column in the New York Times. He was talking about happiness, right? But he was always presenting free market ideas and the thought process around liberty and why that leads to happiness. But it was to an audience that normally probably would not have listened to him. And it was communicating in a way that they would pay attention to his ideas. It became widely successful. Obviously, we all know the story from there. But I remember when he first started doing that, I thought, wow, how does something like this happen? So now we're sitting here talking about how you're able to get free market ideas and voices of the worldwide freedom movement into mainstream and sometimes even progressive leading media outlets. How do you go about pitching? What are the conversations with editors? How are you able to do that?
Yeah, so it's really not rocket science. That's a recurring theme of my career is that oftentimes we'll get out other felt like-minded classical liberal think tanks reaching out to us and asking how we get such media results. And the secret is there really is no secret. You just gotta pitch and develop these relationships with editors. And I think, and one thing is to not let rejections get you down. Of course, if you're pitching the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, you're going to get more no's than yeses. But if you consistently pitch them, say once a month, once a quarter, et cetera, the editor will get familiar with your name, get familiar with your style, what your group is about. So when the news cycle kind of turns in a way that might be favorable to take from your organization, it can be fruitful and result in success. That's we haven't had much luck with the New York Times, at least so far, but at least with the Wall Street Journal, I would say that's how Young Voices has gotten so much placements, is that long-term relationship. Of course, there's other kind of software tools to build to find contact information for editors. But really, I think that what the Liberty Movement can do to get better media results is just invest in communications, marketing and communications, and doing outreach to these outlets that carry influence. Because oftentimes I feel like we've gotten too comfortable with preaching to the choir instead of trying to reach outside our bubble and spread the message of liberty. And ultimately, I would say that I think that is the greatest investment in long-term social change, is trying to talk to people unlike ourselves.
Folks, if you're as inspired and excited about Young Voices and the work that Casey and his colleagues are doing, as inspired, excited as I am, I should say, then I encourage you to go to atlasnetwork.org and become a contributor and support the worldwide freedom movement. The work that Casey and his team are doing and others is supported by generous contributors like yourself. You can join my wife, Kayla, and I. We're members of the Atlas Club and ask you to join us there. Or with a $25 contribution, you'll start to receive Freedom's Champion magazine, where you'll hear stories about all the organizations throughout the worldwide freedom movement, and you can stay engaged that way. Again, atlasnetwork.org. Casey, I remember when I was in public relations, we used to say, look, that journalist, that editor, whatever, they put their pants on the same way you do, one leg at a time every morning, right? And they're going to the office and they're trying to do their job. And so the more that you can align with that or help them do their job by having an honest conversation, an open conversation, form a relationship, the more that you'll learn about the media outlet itself, but the more that you'll have an opportunity to play something. So talk to me about the relational aspect that maybe so many don't understand or are afraid of, but you've already mentioned Young Voices is very successful at building relationships with media outlets.
Yes. In terms of the relational aspect of how to build relationships with media outlets and editors who kind of can open doors for think tanks to get published, mentions, etc. I think consistency is key. So making sure you have their contact information, and there's a lot of great software out there to find it, pitching them consistently, asking them for coffee. This is something that a lot of groups don't do, is just reaching out and asking for coffee if you happen to be in New York or DC or wherever they happen to be. Another trick that I have actually found to be very fruitful for think tanks who have the budget is hosting salon dinners. Young Voices has started to do this in New York City. We host at least once or twice a year a salon dinner with a lot, and invite a lot of folks, especially from News Corp and other types of media outlets. We also just did our first one in DC in January and had a lot of great outlets come as well. Journalists are hungry, so you can really bribe them with a good steak dinner. But more so than anything with money, it's really that consistency, is making sure that you are consistently in front of their in their inbox, not pestering them, but just once a month, once a quarter, developing those relationships.
Can you share a story with maybe some talent that you've discovered that started with you noticed them out there, or maybe they applied to be part of the program and you saw something to them, but then how then this turned into success, honing ideas and being able to communicate them in mediums? I'm sure you have several stories like that. Would you mind sharing one?
Absolutely. So I think our greatest poster boy of our model is Daniel DiMartino. Daniel, I'm sure many listeners may be familiar with, is a Venezuelan freedom fighter and economist. He's currently a PhD student in economics at Columbia University, as well as a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Um, and he got his start with Young Voices. He entered our program, I believe, when he was 18 or 19 years old as an undergraduate at Indiana University. Um, he applied to our programs. We were just amazed by his incredible story of escaping from Venezuela when he was 16, and encouraged him to write about his story. And in 2018, I believe the year was, he got his first major op-ed published in USA Today, which actually turned out to be the most viewed article about Venezuela for that year, according to the Atlantic Council. And since then, to fast forward to this year, I mean, Daniel has just absolutely skyrocketed. He is in demand, especially, of course, the news cycle with everything happening in Venezuela has really propelled him into stardom. Is that he is speaking? I would have to guess it's at least about an average of once a week now, to audiences all over the country, as well as regularly getting major media hits on Fox News, CNN, etc. So he's really become one of the foremost voices when it comes to the pro-freedom side of the Venezuelan conversation. And he traces his origins back to Young Voices. So that's exactly the type of model that we are trying to do at Young Voices. And in fact, Daniel was the founder of the Dissident Project, one of Young Voices programs, which is a speakers bureau for immigrants who came to the U.S. to tell their stories of coming to America and the importance of the ideas of freedom. So at Young Voices, one of our programs is we're trying to develop more people like Daniel to follow in his footsteps.
At Atlas Network, we talk often about a freedom movement that lasts and lives beyond all of us. And one of the things that we find is often people immediately think of policy analysts or who are the social entrepreneurs that are coming up with new ideas to advance. But communicators are such an important part of that. Why do you think communication matters so much? And why would you recommend, as you did earlier in this podcast, that a lot of energy and focus be put toward how we're communicating our ideas?
So I think communication is important because freedom does not advance on its own. Freedom, first of all, to get a little historical, we really need to remember that we live in an exceptional time in history, in the broadest sense, at least since the Enlightenment period. That most of human history, to quote Rousseau, has been nasty, brutish, and short, because of our lizard brain, kind of the tribalist instincts that humans have. And so liberalism, I don't need to preach to the audience, has unleashed just a wonderful, not just wealth, but a wonderful turn in ideas where we see other people not as threats, but potentially as friends, as partners to mutually pursue, separately pursue our own happiness, but also mutually come together and perhaps work and build great things. And so this is not inherent in human DNA. If anything, I would say that our lizard brain kind of tells us the opposite, to be tribalist. So that's why consistent messengers for freedom, for the ideals that we carry forward, is so critical to keep to keep the world to keep the free society going and advance it. And beyond just that, in the historical sense of making sure that we continue the classical liberal tradition in the future, it's important for any movement to have messengers, one, to draw in new people, um, it, into groups like ours, Atlas Network, Young Voices, etc., in terms of the staff. I would say it's also important to bring zoom in onto American politics, is to define the future of the right in particular, and the Republican Party. I would say that Donald Trump has really sucked all the air out of the room, and that there's kind of a question mark of what the future of the Republican Party will look like after Trump in terms of ideologically. So it's important to have messengers there too, who are reinforcing the ideals of the American founding, to define the future of the right. So I think both macro, in the sense of carrying the classical liberal and the free society forward, but also micro in terms of determining the future of politics to carry forward in a more freedom market direction. It's so critical to have messengers.
So I'm sure you face the criticism. I used to hear it all the time when I was in PR. We hear it from time to time now, but there's this criticism that, well, Casey, he's just focused on propaganda. He's just a propaganda, organization that's out there, and they're getting talking points from the White House that they're trying to pitch people and that kind of stuff, right? Whenever you have success, there's always going to be challenges that are trying to chip down the work that you're doing. What do you say to people that challenge or complain about the work of Young Voices?
Yes, I have found with any sort of nonprofit, there's a lot of cynics. First, in terms of kind of the propaganda, complaints or thoughts that Young Voices or other liberty organizations are bought and sold by some shady billionaire. We are an extremely financially diverse organization. No one donor accounts for more than 10% of our funding. So we have a lot of different investors that fortunately puts us in a very strong position to be financially independent. So even if Young Voices loses our biggest donors, we will be just fine carrying forward. So that's the money side of things. In terms of the content side of things, we have developed over the years a really strict editorial guidelines. We have this on our website, actually, a code of ethics, that points that we are an independent organization, we are nonpartisan, we are not loyal to any party. And not just that, but we actually go an additional step than most think tanks, is that we give our writers complete editorial independence. So long as, of course, they are writing takes that are in a classical liberal framework, we allow our writers to comment on whatever they like, whatever they like, with a pro-freedom solution to advance the ideas forward. Because I think that's important, is we want to cultivate independent-minded scholars and thinkers, not just trying to dictate what they should think. So all of those practices have really allowed Young Voices to develop a flourishing network and ecosystem of independently minded classical liberals that will carry the message forward.
Casey, you and I first met through the Atlas Network, and obviously Young Voices is one of the partner organizations in Atlas Network and the Worldwide Freedom Movement. So I want to ask you a little bit about that experience you've had, both for Young Voices, but let's start off for you. What has your experience been like with Atlas Network throughout your career?
Yes, Atlas Network has been just a transformative trainer and partner to Young Voices. Before I go into Young Voices, I should really just talk about my personal journey with Atlas Network. Is that Atlas, when I first spun off Young Voices into a 501c3 nonprofit, was the first call I made. And so I graduated a course from the Leadership Academy online, but participated in several of the in-person training as well. Probably the capstone was what was then called Think Tank MBA. And Think Tank MBA, I participated in 2017, I believe, was really the first strategic plan I developed for Young Voices, came out of that experience. And it has been just absolutely transformative in terms of developing my leadership capabilities, through these opportunities like Think Tank MBA, like the Leadership Academy. I believe the NBA is now called Executive Accelerator. So there's a lot of just tremendous opportunities that were instrumental to my personal growth. In terms of the organization, I have also had several of Young Voices staffers go through Atlas Network's program. I believe at least 4 or 5 of our staffers have gone through the Leadership Academy, and my COO has also participated in the Executive Accelerator. And of course, through the grant opportunities, of course, Atlas Network has been a supporter of Young Voices and so many great organizations. But more so than just the monetary support, what I appreciate about Atlas Network is how they showcase organizations like Young Voices to their supporters as well. A lot of organizations are guarded about showcasing other organizations to their supporters, which is quite understandable. But what I love about Atlas is it's ingrained in the mission to showcase the worldwide liberty movement to generous supporters through opportunities like Smart Bets, which Young Voices was in the second class for as a candidate. So I think that I am extremely grateful for Atlas Network, not just in my personal growth, but in the development and support for Young Voices.
When we specifically think about being part of an Atlas Network and more than 500 peer organizations, what is that like for Young Voices, and how is that an advantage to be part of such a large network?
Well, it's been fabulous for networking. Personally, I love it that, whenever I travel to outside the US, it seems like in any city I go to, even if I haven't been before, I have some sort of friend who can show me around. So I think that's really cool, just to give a personal anecdote. But in terms of the network itself, it's been tremendously helpful, I would say, in getting and expanding our program priorities. I'll give you one example is that we have an active grant this year from the Rising Tide Foundation to do communications training in Europe. They were very intrigued with Young Voices model and thought that we have a lot to teach to certain European think tanks, particularly the smaller ones. And it was really the network that we built through Atlas Network that made us recruit folks in Europe and these think tank staffers to join the program. Starting from scratch at ground zero, it would have been difficult to identify these folks, but because of Atlas Network, we were able to successfully execute this program. And that's just one of many examples I could use of how being part of the Atlas Network has been tremendously successful in the success of our programs.
So if we think about you're at one of the Atlas Network events, right? You and I have run into each other every year in New York at the Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner each November. But of course, Atlas Network hosts forums in Latin America, just happened in Lima, Peru. They'll be in Europe, also in Asia and Africa as well. And so our partners are running into each other and contributors, donors to the worldwide freedom movement. So Casey, I want to ask you it's probably happened, right? Where you've been in New York or one of these other forums and you run into someone who's contributing and investing in the future of the worldwide freedom movement. If they were to say to you, Casey, it's so vast and the challenges are so big, I don't know if I'm making a difference. What would you say to that person that's investing in the worldwide freedom movement?
Well, I would say, first of all, when it comes to philanthropy, if you look at the etymology of it, it really comes from the Greek of love of humanity. And so, what I love about our world is that it truly shows that our supporters are. It really is an act of love and an act of reflection of their values to give to groups like ours. And I think that it's even if you think the odds are against us, which I do not think. I am an optimist. I think that it's tremendously powerful to support the work of Young Voices Atlas Network and so many other groups around the world. And especially going to an Atlas Network conference, I feel like I come so inspired by meeting not so much the Americans, but people from around the world where these ideas are truly novel and are truly, have the odds are stacked up against them even harder. It makes me even more optimistic to be an American since our country was founded. Liberalism is kind of in the DNA. But in terms of investment and making sure that it is that your investment is going towards the most effective means, I would say that the fact that Atlas Network has such a wide portfolio of groups, if you want to, think of it in terms of financial terms, is that there are so many leaders like myself and others, and so many groups that you can take a deep dive on and make sure that you're invest in groups that you think are making the most transformative difference. Whether your interest is in talent development, policy, more do tanks who are actually doing lobbying. There is such a diversity of different groups and a lot to choose from that someone who is a investor but wants to be a savvy investor can really take a deep dive and invest in something that can make a real difference. We've seen, just to bring it down to more of the policy level, is that we've seen innovations like school choice or the right to try really gain momentum, particularly in the States over the past few decades. And those were really the innovations of think tanks that, libertarian, classical, liberal, free market think tanks that are making a real difference. So I would say that even if you're pessimistic about the global state of the world, there are real differences you can make in your backyard with smart investments.
Casey, I appreciate that perspective. I agree with you. I think you captured that well. But now I need to push you on a little something. We've had
Yes.
We've had a fun conversation today about opportunity and about not just Young Voices, the organization, but Young Voices, the future of the worldwide freedom movement. But I'm wondering, right? This device, we live in this world with social media and with viral polarization, right? Where the echo chambers get louder and louder, and the way that you kind of get discovered or have discussion feels like you have to be pitted against each other. And so there's a lot of negativity and concern. And yet you're saying that it's possible to break through and have a world where policy ideas can emerge to the top. But there's a pretty pessimistic view that we hear going round and round about these devices. So why are you so optimistic? Why do you have so much enthusiasm about the future?
Yes, I totally understand those concerns, and there are a lot of important and legitimate conversations to be had about the negative effects of social media, phone addiction, etc. And even some scholars who are sympathetic to our ideas, like Jonathan Haidt, who are leading these conversations. I would say, I am a history nerd, and I love, I like to liken the invention of the smartphone really to, or the internet broadly, to the invention of the printing press. People forget that led to over 100 years of war in Europe, and we're certainly at least doing better so far historically. Although maybe not much better, some people might argue. But I would say that new technologies emerge over history, and it takes some time for adjustment in terms of, especially, I liken to the printing press, of course, the free spread of information. We're seeing something similar with internet, smartphones, and kind of oversaturation of information, perhaps. But there is, over time, a reversion to the mean. We're seeing it already with many schools or countries like Australia banning usage of phones and whatnot during school hours. I think there's a lot of more conscious conversations, particularly as it comes to kids and teenagers, about smartphone usage. But overall, I would say that that I'm an optimist that we're going to have more of this return to norm. People will adjust and have healthier relationships to to the internet and social media as time goes on. But it has been such a miracle in terms of over time having societies embrace classical liberal ideas. I think that perhaps if it wasn't for smartphones, we wouldn't be aware of what was happening in Iran, or even to go back in the past, 10, 20 years ago, the Arab Spring. Is that I ultimately think that while every new technology has trade-offs, that overall we're going to see the use of the development of the internet, smartphones as a liberating technology that will be for freedom. Of course, that's not without challenges. And I would say that libertarians, especially, we have a tendency to just sit back and be like, oh, creative destruction, everything will be great. I think that we need to lean into these conversations, and Young Voices in particular has been leaning into the conversations about AI, kid safety online, etc. And maybe my libertarian card will have to be taken away from me. Is that I think there is a way to do smart regulations that embrace and preserve freedom. And so it's important to lean into these conversations. But overall, I think that we should not be pessimists. Is that the world has gotten freer, and it can continue to get freer if we invest in messengers.
Casey, I want to ask you, there's two different people that I'm sure are listening to this conversation, or maybe they've heard about Young Voices, right? One of them is a think tank leader that wants to figure out how to connect with a voice. They need to find a voice that can help communicate a policy idea. The other one is a young voice, right? It's someone that may be in the worldwide free market movement or freedom movement, excuse me, or it may be someone who's not, who's interested in what we like to say liberty curious, right? How do they engage with Young Voices, right? What's the way to plug in? Because it seems like you have access to so much talent. You know about the right voices who are talking about the right things. You can see the direction conversations are going. So, how do those two groups of people engage with you?
Yes, let me tackle the second one first, because that's, I think, the easiest answer is that at Young Voices, for interested program participants who may want to join our programs, we have a very simple, one door entry, which is our website, joinyv.org. We have one application to join our contributor program. And after acceptance, we have a whole world of opportunities for those folks: policy fellowships, mentorships, events, of course, the media hits that I mentioned, op-eds, radio, TV, a whole ecosystem of alumni, et cetera, to connect with. So I encourage anyone who's interested in our programs to check that out. And fortunately, it's just one application for the whole ecosystem of opportunities. Now, when it comes to think tanks, this is something that I'm going to have to be a bit of a tease, because this is part of a strategic plan that we're developing right now. But I absolutely see that opportunity for Young Voices to serve more as a talent funnel for great communicators for liberty to work for other think tanks, whether that be full-time as scholars or even part-time as contractors to help amplify their messages online. We are currently in the process of adapting our programs, especially to make exactly these types of connections. So there's a lot more coming that we're going to be in touch with for different think tanks, about how we can better serve them as a connector and as a PR agent in the future. One of which I actually already mentioned is the Liberty Comms Lab that we did in Europe with the Rising Tide. We're looking to develop those types of programs to not just develop our talent, but also connect our talent to other think tanks and collectively improve the whole liberty movement's comms game. So that's something that I'm very excited about, looking not just 1 year in the future, but 4 years in the future, of how Young Voices can help be the battery that really helps drive the engine of the liberty movement towards better classical liberal messaging.
Casey, can folks outside of the United States partner with Young Voices?
Yes, absolutely. We allow applications to our contributor program for anyone around the world. I will say, with a slight caveats to manage expectations, is that the media outlets we work with are primarily in the United States and Europe. So if, for example, somebody from India wanted to apply, it's not a no. We absolutely usually accept one or a few folks from Asia or Africa or South America every year. However, their work would have to be directed at publishing in the outlets that we know. So if there's if there's think tankers from the Outlets Network who want to get involved and direct their work at an American or European audience, we would love to have you in our program.
Casey, last question here about Young Voices in particular. Can you share a story? There's a recent story. I think someone reached out and needed to identify a voice or some talent. You had relationships with Ecuador and with a Spanish speaking commentator, and you were basically the hub that was able to connect so many different folks and realize an opportunity. Can you share that story with us?
Yes, absolutely. Ann Miller reached out to me, a great Atlas Network staffer, and they're asked to connect with someone, with a Spanish speaker who could comment on Ecuadorian politics. I kind of I'm hazy about the exact details, but we were able to connect one of our talent, a Spanish speaker, to comment for a radio opportunity. So that's just kind of a small example of the breadth and connection that young voices can have in our, particularly our alumni network, is that we have over 700 alumni in our program. So we have a lot of talent, a large talent pool of competent, vetted communicators for liberty that we can make such connections.
Casey, throughout this conversation, I've been sitting here thinking like, okay, I know what journalists are like in the media industry. And so an organization that is focused on young talent and connecting with a media and journalists and just communications has to be a cool organization, has to have a ton of fun. So I want to land the plane here asking you just a couple of questions, not about what you do day to day, but what it's like hanging out and being around you in the office day to day. So if one of your partners or peer organizations came to hang out with you, or if I was there with you today and we finished and we were going to go down the street or in your neck of the woods and have something to eat, where are we going? Where are we going to hang out?
Absolutely. Well, I am a rare breed in that I am a libertarian living in New York City. So I moved from DC 4 years ago. Absolutely love the city life, and am just kind of a natural extrovert. So I love exploring all different bars, restaurants, social clubs in New York City. Personally, I live in the East Village, which is just a mecca of lots of great food, bars, restaurants, etc. But also socially, I'm a member of the Union League Club in Murray Hill, just south of Grand Central, which is a great historical institution founded by progressive Republicans to support the North during the Civil War in the 1860s. So, say if somebody were to visit me in New York City, I would probably suggest something like drinks at the Union League Club. I would give them a tour, particularly of the library collection. I'm on the library committee, so it's a very great historical collection. Maybe we would go to a nice dinner like Keen's, one of my favorite steakhouses, is just a few blocks south of the Union League Club, and then end up in the East Village. Some of my favorite spots to go around here. Well, there's so many to mention, but there's a very cool one I like to go to close to my apartment called Mano y Mano, which is just has a big garden patio, and it's a very great New York vibe. So that's probably what hanging out with me would look like on some random day.
I think Keen's, don't they have pipes on the ceiling? And I
Yes.
think that was Theo Roosevelt's spot when it first started way back in the day. A fantastic restaurant. All right, what does the team at Young Voices do for fun? Like when you guys are together and you're hanging out outside of the office, what are the cultural, social things that you guys like to do?
Yes, absolutely. So we're a very remote organization. We have, although we have two offices, one in DC, one in New York. So really getting together, we usually do it during staff retreats. And we're currently in the process of planning our next one. Our last one, I remember we went to New Orleans. Of course, besides the obvious, the eating and drinking, we really embraced the historical aspects. It did a tour of the French Quarter, went to a lot of different spots around the city to kind of learn more about the history of it all. So I would say we have a very active group who likes to learn about the richness of American history, and get out there and kind of connect it to our work on a daily basis. Yeah.
Love it, Casey. I'm going to give you the last word on the pod. We've talked about joinyv.org, talked about other ways to engage with you all, but what are your final closing thoughts today for the conversation?
I would just say that I would encourage my fellow nonprofits and as well as investors in the movement to focus on talent development, as we mentioned up top, but also focus on media and communications. I think that the movement's bottleneck is not so much in the production of ideas as much as the distribution. I think that we need to be do much better at investing in people who can competently communicate the ideas and lean into conversations, even the difficult conversations like immigration, war, AI, technology, we talked about a little bit. We need to be on the forefront of these conversations as classical liberals, not just standing back and being, oh, we'll let the market decide. So I think that it's important for the movement to up its game when it comes to media. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Young Voices. So our website is youngvoicesjoinyb.org. We also have a separate website for the Dissident Project if you're interested in that, dissidentproject.org. And I would love to get in touch with anyone who's interested in our work. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, Michael.
Casey, thank you for being part of the conversation and joining us on the Atlas Network podcast. Thank you for all the work that you and your colleagues at Young Voices are doing. Folks, I encourage you to join my wife and I as part of the Atlas Club. I encourage you to go to atlasnetwork.org, where you can find more information about Young Voices and the nearly 500 organizations throughout the worldwide freedom movement. And while you're there, take a look at the events page. See one of the upcoming events, one of the Liberty Forums that's happening across the globe, and join Casey and I in New York City this November for the annual Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner. Folks, really appreciate you listening to this episode of Atlas Network Podcast. Until next time, stay free and go Liberty.